This video is, in many ways, a story about someone seeing an article online and just going, wait a second, there's absolutely no way that's correct. And that was me. I saw an article online that said that Silvery Barbs was going to kill S.H.I.E.L.D. And I just saw that article and I'm like, there's absolutely no way whatsoever that that's true. There's no way that Silvery Barbs kills S.H.I.E.L.D. And so I went out and I decided to do the math on it. And what I found may surprise you quite a bit. So before I start doing anything else in this video, I just want to ask you. So you have a single attack coming to hit you. Do you think that S.H.I.E.L.D. or Silvery Barbs is going to be better? So like, monster's attacking you, there's one monster, you have one spell slot, after this the day's going to be over. Which do you think is going to prevent more damage? Does it depend on your AC? Or what the monster's attack bonus is? And so, if so, what ranges do you think it's better? And does it depend on if the monster has advantage or disadvantage? And if they do the AC or bonuses still matter? I'm like, write this down, put it in the comments, write it on a piece of paper, whatever, something so that you can't change your answer halfway through. I want you to have something so at the end of the video you can look back and be like, oh hey, I learned something. So just think about that. And then a couple of disclaimers about what I'm going to cover. I counted a crit, as you can see in this spreadsheet. I counted a crit as double damage. You could make a very good argument, I think, that a crit is not double damage. A crit is more like 1.5 to 1.95 times damage most of the time, and you would be right. And some things also have expanded critical range, and that could also matter. And I'm just not gonna cover any of those here, because while a monster's flat bonuses, like their strength or dexterity or what have you, don't get multiplied by the critical bonus, every once in a while you're fighting a monster with a vorpal sword that on a crit cuts your head off. And so I'm just sort of balancing those out, saying that it counts as double damage, which is a simplification, but it's a really useful one, and it makes the calculations much easier. And I'm not doing this for a range of different values because that's ridiculous. Another thing is Silvery Barbs does give you advantage. And so even if Silvery Barbs is a little bit worse, maybe you still want to use Silvery Barbs because it can give you advantage. And that's something that you can't dismiss. Maybe Silvery Barbs causes you to take 5 more damage, but are you willing to pay 5 HP to get advantage? How much HP is advantage worth? Certainly, I think if you could pay a tenth of a hit point in order to get advantage, that's either paying 1 hit point and getting advantage on your next 10 rolls, or you got advantage once, and then you had a 1 in 10 chance of taking 1 damage. That would probably be worth it. You'd roll at advantage all the time. You'd never roll flat again. But if you had a 100 damage that you could take to get advantage, then you would probably almost never take that, and you would just never use that opportunity. And so having this ability to be like, well, maybe I take a little bit extra damage, maybe Silvery Barb's a little bit worse, but I get advantage. I'm not really going to cover exactly how much that's worth, but I have a lot of the numbers here so you can see exactly how much extra damage you're taking. And it depends, of course, on how hard the monster hits, how much HP you have, like how much all this would be worth, and so you can see how much extra damage the monster will deal if you use Barbs and decide if that's worth advantage or not. And then Barbs is also useful in other ways. You can use it most notably on saving throws. This video is not meant to find a conclusion on whether Silvery Barbs is a good or bad spell. The spell is disgustingly overtuned because you can use it to dunk other people's saves. This is specifically a response to somebody saying it killed S.H.I.E.L.D. and its usage on attack rolls. Silvery Barbs is still a great spell, and you should be using it a lot, just not necessarily on attack rolls all the time if you also have access to S.H.I.E.L.D. And with that, let's actually start getting into the numbers. So this, I just sort of put HP as 100. This is nice because you can look at numbers later and be like, oh, if I'm taking this much damage, this is the effective HP I'll have. And you can turn this into a percentage really easily. But you can change this around and it doesn't change very much. So this is the number the monster needs to roll on the die to hit your AC. So a 1 would basically be, if the monster rolls a 1, their bonus is high enough that they would still hit you if it wasn't an automatic miss. And a 20 or more is the monster will never hit you unless it's a critical hit. And most characters sort of end up throughout their adventuring careers lying somewhere in this range of like 4 to 14. Very rare is it that you end up having such garbage AC that you're like in this range. This is like you're fighting Tiamat, but you have 15 AC range. And this is like also equally ridiculous. This is like you're in tier 2, but you're playing a Warforged Blade Singer with mage armor who has bracers of defense. And is fighting like orcs, right? Like this is also something that's ridiculous and never happens most of the time. This can also happen if you're like fighting stuff that's really overtuned, but getting to this point without shield is really difficult most of the time. And so you can see, if the monster needs to roll that much to hit you, how many hits are you going to be taking? Counting a crit as 2 hits. And well, if you roll the die once, 20 of those times count as hits, because you automatically get missed once on a 1, but you'll get crit for approximately double damage some of the time, and that evens out. You'll take 20 hits on a 100-sided die. The average damage from getting hit is 100% of the damage. And as you go through the ranks, you take less and less damage, which means that your effective HP grows more and more as you gain more AC. And this sort of makes sense. If you think about it, the jump from going between getting hit on a 19 to getting hit on a 20 means that you are taking 33% less damage. 33% of hits that would hit you before are now misses. Whereas if you go from 11 AC to 10 AC, you're taking like 1 in 10 hits that would hit you before as a miss. So AC actually gets better as you get more of it, which is why shield also is better if you have a lot of AC already. As you can see, when you have really low AC, shield does nothing. If the monster is already hitting you on a -4 or better, they're still gonna hit you if you shield. Because if they didn't roll a 1, they're still hitting the minimum required to hit you. But as you go up through the AC, it gets better and better. And this actually becomes best when the monster needs to roll a 15 or higher to hit you, because now they need to roll a crit to hit you. And if they need to roll a crit to hit you, then you have a lot more defenses. And you can see I wrote down, this is basically just your effective HP from shield divided by your effective HP without shield. And so this is the percent HP gain you get from shield. And so you can see shield is a really powerful spell. It prevents a lot of damage just by having it available if you're going to get attacked. But Silvery Barbs causes you to re-roll the attack, which means that it's effectively disadvantage. And so, since it's effectively disadvantage, what this means is you get to use disadvantage odds. And so you can compare the effective HP from without disadvantage to with it. And what you end up seeing is that Silvery Barbs at really high AC gives you a lot of defense. And you can see the gain here. The better the AC you have, even more so than with shield, the better your defenses are. And so, as you can see, when this is purple, this means that Barbs is better. And when this is blue, this means that I put shield. Shield has better numbers. This is just showing which one is better at all. But if you want to see how much better they are, we have this over here. So as you can see, when you have really low AC, shield doesn't help you at all, because monsters will still hit you regardless. And then you hit this patch where shield does give you better AC. But even here, sometimes it doesn't really give you that much extra AC. When a monster hits you on a 6 or better, it's only giving you a little bit more HP. Shield is not helping you that much. And so maybe this is the part where you go, well, maybe you cast Silvery Barbs anyway, because you get advantage. So maybe Silvery Barbs is still better when the monster only needs to roll a 6 to hit you. Silvery Barbs gets rapidly better as you climb the AC. Up until 20 AC, where Silvery Barbs is doing something and Shield does literally nothing. Alright, that's all cool. But what if a monster has advantage against you? Well, if a monster has advantage against you, we can figure out that you have this much damage taken by summing up all of this stuff and then applying the multiplier for a critical hit. And so you can see what your effective HP is normally, which is once again, the percent of damage you're taken is dividing into your actual base HP up here. And so like I could change this to 200 and you would see how much extra HP you get, what your new effective HP is. And so you have, basically if you have 20 AC but the monster has advantage on you, you have effectively roughly 5.5 times more HP than someone who has no AC, which is still a lot of defense. And Shield can defend you against this, similar to how it defends you against normal attacks. It's a little bit worse because AC does get worse if the monster has advantage on you. So you end up with these weirder numbers. They're a little bit lower, but it still provides you a really large HP boost. Now, Barbs ends up giving you much weirder results because you're taking the lowest of 2 advantage rolls. And so you end up getting this really wonky distribution, but we can still do the math on this pretty easily. And we figure out that Barbs gives you a lot of HP at all of these levels instead. I should put a disclaimer here. Everything before this point was calculated deterministically, and this is a Monte Carlo. Every number from this point on involving Barbs involved a Monte Carlo simulation. So it's not going to be like 100% perfect, but I'm pretty confident that the numbers are within like 5% of where they're supposed to be. Especially on the numbers which have a much larger sample size. I did 1 million trials for each AC level. And so you can still compare your percent of damage taken with Barbs and figure out new effective HP. And as you can see, as you have really high AC, Barbs still gives you a lot of defense. But as you can see from over here, Shield still gives a lot of defense. Shield gives more in a lot of these cases, even though they're pretty close. Shield is still giving you more AC and more effective HP. And then once you hit this point where you get past 16 and Shield stops really working, then Barbs becomes better again by a lot. Alright, so that makes sense. What if the monster has disadvantage against you? Well, now this is inverted. Instead of them being more likely to hit you, they're less likely to hit you. And so as you can see, simply a monster having disadvantage on attacks against you gives you a really large boost compared to what we have up here. Here, your effective HP is in the hundreds until you get to 12 AC.
Hey guys, Mid from the future here with a quick update. I keep saying AC here, and usually what you should take that to mean is number the monster needs to roll to hit you. So that's not whatever your actual AC is, it's just whatever the monster needs to roll to hit you. Alright. Now, back to the regularly scheduled program.
And here, if you have 12 AC, you now have almost 500 effective HP. So monsters having disadvantage to hit you, turns out, is really good. And we'll look at the damage that Shield blocks in these cases. Shield ends up blocking a colossal amount of damage if the monster has disadvantage against you, because now it gives you the benefits of having higher AC while the monster has disadvantage on you, which is huge. Really high AC is good when monsters have disadvantage on you. But on the other hand, Silvery Barbs lets you re-roll it twice. So even if you have moderate AC, they have to roll 4 dice and take the smallest one. So Silvery Barbs also is really powerful when you have disadvantage. And so your effective HP ends up being colossal in a lot of these cases, especially as you get to the higher ACs. But Shield's bonus ends up winning out a lot, and this is where I was like really shocked. This is not at all what I expected to see when I compared the two. I did not expect anything looking like this, where Shield starts being good as soon as you start mitigating damage, and by a lot. But then as you get to 9 AC, Silvery Barbs gets a little bit better, but only for a little bit, as soon Shield starts being really good again, until you get to 15 AC, at which point Barbs is still better. This was very surprising to me. I didn't expect to see anything like this. A lot of this surprised me, actually. I expected Shield to be much better at this point in time. I expected it to be, like, better up through, like, here. Up to, like, 12 to hit, or so. And Silvery Barb surprised me there. But, as you can see, Shield is still really good. So what have we learned so far? If you only get the choice between one of them, Barbs ends up being better when the monster attacking you is decent, or you have really terrible AC. But when the monster has advantage against you, or disadvantage against you, you end up getting a lot more value out of Shield most of the time, for most AC ranges. Most of the realistic AC ranges, which again is in like this 4 to 14 range, is roughly realistic. This is good and all, but there are two really important things that I haven't mentioned yet. One, you can have both of them. You can have even more defense, because if you have both of them, and a monster hits you, and it's not shieldable, you can Silvery Barbs it, and then have a chance of re-rolling it into something better for you. But also, Shield will last the entire turn, and Silvery Barbs won't. So this is what I'm going to get to here. So as you can see, we still have this damage modifier set up. And then this was also all Monte Carlo'd. I did a Monte Carlo simulation, and this is what I found. These were the numbers for if you had both Shield and Silvery Barbs. And I'm going to have my R code linked in the description so you can see what I used, you can tweak it a bit, you can try and edit it. But this gives you actually a much larger, as expected, effective HP. And you can see there's a little bit of variance in here, as there are tiny numerical differences between the low end and the top end. This is all variance. But you can see that you gain a good chunk of defense from having both of these. And in fact, this is the amount that you gain over both, as opposed to just having one or the other. And you can see that, once again, in these ranges where Shield ends up being really good, you get a lot from having both. You can reroll the bad attacks, and you can just shield the attacks that are normally going to hit you. And so then this is where I got into this. This basically says, let's say that there's some attack that's going to hit you, and it's not shieldable, but it is going to hit you. Do you even want to Barbs it? Because you can shield in the future and guarantee completely negating an attack that falls within your shield range. Or the monster might crit you. And if the monster crits you, then you really want to re-roll it, because no matter what you do, you can't shield that. And so what I put here is the amount of reduction you get from Silvery Barbs. And this is the flat amount of reduction you will get on a future attack from having both of them available. And so then I took the difference here. And when this is negative, what this means is, even if you get hit, it's better to save your Barbs and Shield for a future attack, save your reaction, than to use your Barbs to reroll the attack. And as you can see, sometimes this difference is really small, and when it's small, like I said before, you might just want to do it and get advantage, because advantage could be worth some amount of HP. Maybe you're willing to take the 3% more damage on the next attack in order to get advantage guaranteed. But as you can see, even with the really low ACs, you still don't want to Barbs them if you get hit, if you're taking at least one more attack. And this is, just so we're clear, this number is a floor on the number of attacks remaining, for it to not be sensible to block it. I could not find a good way to do the value, but this will definitely give you a minimum of number of attacks. If you're taking 2 attacks, it might still make sense to block it. I'm not certain about that. I would need to do much more intense calculation than I did, and I was already putting way too much work into this video. But certainly, if you're taking 2 or fewer attacks, you just want to block it anyway, with barbs. And then the other thing is, something I didn't really mention here. If these numbers are what happened, if you're in this 15 plus range, the monster needs to roll a 15 to hit you, none of these can actually end up happening. You will never get hit in such a way that it's not a crit, but shield can't block it. But it still might be worth the like small HP cost anyway. This is sort of a comparison of how much damage you're going to take on the next attack if you don't barbs it. So maybe you barbs it anyway and you get advantage, but you're going to take some more damage on your next incoming attacks. And this is just the same thing, but for critical hits. So crits, obviously, you can reroll them into a normal hit, or you can reroll them into a miss. Or if you get really unlucky, something crits you, and you reroll it into a crit, and then you cry. But that doesn't happen very often, and as you can see here, once again, this is a floor on the number of attacks, so if you're taking 2 or fewer additional attacks after the crit, you definitely want to barbs that. And if you're taking more than that, it might still be worth it to barbs it. I haven't calculated enough to know for sure, but certainly if you're taking 2 or fewer, you just barbs it then. But if you're taking like 20 attacks, well, you might want to hold out for shield anyway, because even though you're getting crit now, and that stings, you're going to be taking a whole lot more attacks in the future. And so blocking more of those non-crits is still going to be very important. And you can also look at how much you gain from having both when the monster has advantage against you. And it turns out here the gain is actually really big. The ability to reroll the things that hit, but get crit, is a big advantage. Reroll the crits, just shield the normal hits, that's huge. That's a lot of defense that you gain. And so you end up seeing that we gain a good chunk over just having one or the other. This is, by the way, this percent gain over both is the gain that you have over having just one or the other, whichever one would be better in the scenario. And so just by having both available, if someone's going to attack you and you don't know what they've rolled yet, you get a lot of defense just from having both of them available to cast, depending on the scenario. And we can do this again and see what reduction the damage will have. If they're going to hit you, do you want to just barbs it, or do you want to hold out and maybe shield other stuff? And once again, this 15 to 19 category can't ever happen. You will always be able to shield these, but you still might want to barbs it anyways, theoretically, just so that you could get the advantage. So I put the numbers in there as well. And as you can see, generally speaking, it's worth it to just barbs it if you get hit. But even up here, sometimes it's worth it to not barbs it, just if you wanted that advantage. And we can move on, and we can see that if you get crit, how much damage are you reducing on average by barbsing it? And the answer is actually usually a lot, usually enough that you'll probably want to barbs this unless a bunch of zombies are hitting you, or you're surrounded by ogres, or something else is attacking you a lot. And then this is also fairly interesting if you have disadvantage. If the monster has disadvantage to hit you, well, obviously we saw how ridiculously powerful barbs was, and how ridiculously powerful shield was, and having both gives you this colossal damage reduction in a lot of cases against a single attack. But when you're taking multiple attacks, it's basically not worth it most of the time to barb stuff unless you're gonna get crit. You're taking unless you just want the advantage, because again, the extra damage you're taking is also really small, so it's kind of a toss-up there. But most of the time, if you get hit while you have 15 AC, even though you're getting a ton of defenses from having both, you just want to shield it anyway, and not worry about it. Unless you get crit, in which case you still get a lot of damage reduction, as you can see. the difference is fairly large in terms of the damage reduction from if you get crit. Alright, so what did we learn so far? Basically, to begin with, AC is really good. AC in high quantities gives you a lot of damage reduction. If you require a 20 to get hit, it takes 10 times as many attacks to kill you compared to if a monster hits you on a 2 or higher. So that's really powerful. And both shield and barbs are really powerful in their own right. But shield lasts for multiple attacks, and barbs doesn't. We also learned that if you have both shield and barbs, usually, if you get the chance, you're going to want to shield damage if you get hit by something that can block it. But you might want to barbs it in certain AC ranges where you don't get as much damage reduction. Specifically, if you are at really high AC, generally worth it to barbs it if you're not taking more other attacks. If the monster has advantage on you, generally worth it to shield it, unless you're taking more attacks. Or just hold your reaction in case you get crit, and use the damage reduction that way. And not just reroll random attacks coming your way unless it's the last one and it's hitting you. And then you might as well reroll it, because you're not going to have another chance to use your reaction anyway. And when the monster has disadvantage on you, you almost never want to barbs. Unless the monster hits you, because shield will almost always just block this damage outright. And even if they do hit you, you still probably want to save it for a crit, if you have these really low AC ranges. If you like this video, make sure that you hit the like button, and if you want to see more like it in the future, please subscribe down below. Thanks for watching.